Well, I don't know about you, but I am not real fond of failure. I don't know that I know anybody that really relishes failing. We had been married less than 3 years when Vicki and I went to a missionary training program in British Columbia. It was a very good program, and we stayed in a dormitory room for almost 3 months with little baby Andrea. Taught her to, her little no-no was don't touch the garbage can, that time of life. And at the end of this program, the director wrote an evaluation for each one of us. And one of his conclusions on my written evaluation was Barry needs to fail. I'm still really not sure what he meant by that, but I do know that he didn't know me very well if he thought I had never failed. We grow up failing. When you're learning to walk, you fail time and time again. Who doesn't have scars on their knee from learning to ride a bicycle? We fail a lot. Most of us, though, don't like talking about our failures. We would much rather people just see the successes that we have. I think this may be one of the reasons why I really enjoy playing with video. With video, I can take and retake until I'm satisfied, at least enough that when I sit down to edit, I can hide all my failures. Nobody will see the bloopers. Several weeks ago, I showed a little video from a week that I spent up at Vicky's Villa in March. And you saw 3 minutes out of more than 80 minutes of raw footage that I had. I had several shots from Paul Obrist's drone in the video. At 30 below, the drone flew beautifully, but the obstacle sensors on the drone don't work when it's that cold. I was very happy with the pictures it was taking. This shot of flying north on the lake was particularly just stunning. But keep watching. I was flying up Bear Creek here, just upstream from the cabin, and you saw this footage of the drone rounding the corner to the east with the sun filtering through the trees, but I edited out what happened at the end of this flight. Watch. That is not good. I didn't want anybody to see that. So I had a $900 drone stuck up in about 20 feet up in a birch tree. And it was a half mile away from me, through the wilderness, through the woods, and I had no idea which tree it was in. I could see the branches on the tree. It kept taking video. So I waded through waist-deep snow, and I was frantic to find the drone. And because I kept, on the controller, I kept getting messages, the battery is low, and I knew it would stop, not only stop taking pictures, I mean, the picture didn't do me any good, but the position report and the lights on the drone, because I kept looking up, it was starting to get dark, and I knew I would be able to see the lights in the tree if I could find the drone in time. I was really worried I wasn't going to find it. I actually did, just before dark. I couldn't get to it. It was way up there. And the following day, I went up there to get it, and I'd stayed awake most of the night trying to figure out how am I going to get this drone out of the tree, how to cut the tree down without making the tree fall down and crushing the drone on the way down. So I had it all planned. I got up there, and the wind had been blowing in the night, and the drone was laying in the snow underneath the tree, so I got it back. Well, whether you can laugh at your failures or whether you tend to try to hide them, anybody who's lived more than, just a few years knows what it's like to fail. Even people who act like they have never failed know what it's like to fail. For the past several weeks, we've been studying Jesus' final week on earth, and it started out with his grand entrance into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. Then we went to the Last Supper. Well, we saw him clear out the temple on Monday, then the Last Supper on Thursday. And today I want to zoom in on probably the biggest failure that we see in the Gospels, and it was Peter's failure, Peter's big failure. And we're going to see in Peter's failure and Jesus' response, we're going to see ourselves. It's going to be a mirror. And we will see Christ responding to us. At the very time when Jesus most needed Peter's support, Peter denied even knowing who Jesus was. It happened shortly after Jesus was arrested by the temple guards. In the middle of the night, they had taken Jesus to the home of Caiaphas, the high priest, who was in on the plot to seize Jesus, of course. And most of the disciples ran off as soon as Jesus was arrested. They were afraid they would be arrested too. But Peter didn't. Peter stayed around. Luke's gospel says Peter followed at a distance. And when some there had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and had sat down together, Peter sat down with them. A servant girl saw him seated there in the firelight. She looked closely at him and said, "This man was with him." But he denied it. "Woman, I don't know him," he said. A little later, someone else saw him and said, "You also are one of them." "Man, I am not," Peter replied. About an hour later, another asserted, "Certainly this fellow was with him, for he is a Galilean." Peter replied, "Man, I don't know what you're talking about." Just as he was speaking, the rooster crowed, and the Lord turned and looked straight at Peter. Then Peter remembered the word of the Lord, the word the Lord had spoken to him, "Before the rooster crows today, you will disown me 3 times." And then he went outside and wept bitterly. Now, of course, let's keep in mind, Peter was not the only disciple to abandon Jesus. Peter's failure was just the most spectacular of all the disciples. Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's interesting, they tell about Peter's failure, but they don't finish the story. They just leave it there. It took John, who wrote his gospel about how many decades later? About 3 after the other gospel writers. John, he filled in a lot of gaps that the other gospel writers left out. And one of those gaps happened to be what happened to Peter. He tells us. I mean, everybody in the first century, they didn't need John's gospel to know that. They all knew what happened to Peter. They all knew that Peter recovered because Peter was there in Jerusalem preaching that big sermon at the day of Pentecost. So they knew that Peter had somehow gotten back in good graces. But it took John's gospel to tell us how it happened. And he does it in an epilogue. It's really interesting, in kind of a postscript to his gospel. It's as if John finished writing his gospel in John chapter 20, and he laid down his quill, and then I forgot to put in the part about Peter and his restoration. So he picks up the quill again, and he writes John chapter 21. And I'm glad he did, because I don't think there's anybody in this room, certainly, that can't relate to Peter's failure and that won't relate to his restoration. None of us can say we have never disappointed Christ. None of us can say we have always made good decisions and I don't have any regrets. Malcolm Muggeridge said it well. Christianity from Golgotha onwards has been the sanctification of failure. And John begins chapter 21, this epilogue, by saying that after Jesus appeared to his disciples in Jerusalem, some of the disciples decided to leave Jerusalem and go back up north to Galilee, where they were from. They may well have joined relatives who had come to Jerusalem for the Passover. They were going home, and these disciples decided to go with them. Here's John chapter 21. After this, Jesus revealed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias, Sea of Galilee, and he revealed himself in this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples were together. Simon Peter said to them, "I am going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and they got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Now, many sermons have been preached over the years about how returning to fishing was Peter's second big failure. There isn't a hint of that in John's gospel. When Jesus appeared to the disciples in Jerusalem, he told them that he was going to be sending them out, but he didn't say where, he didn't say when, he didn't say how, and then he disappeared. He's gone. And the disciples weren't sure what to do. They knew that if they stayed in Jerusalem, they would be on this, they would likely be found out where they were, and the Jerusalem authorities might come and arrest them and kill them, who knows. So lacking clear instructions, they headed home. Nothing wrong with that at all. I don't know if you remember the first time that you went home after an extended time away. Remember that? Remember going home? I'll never forget going home for Christmas after coming down here for my freshman year in college, first semester. My parents had moved while I was down here, and so the home that I went back to there was different. The house was different, and I didn't know the town well. It wasn't familiar. But what I remember is I couldn't wait to get home to go out back of the barn where my old Malamute sled dog, Queenie, was tied. Queenie was the mother of my whole dog team when I was in high school. We had spent countless hours together in the woods. And I remember running out behind the barn to where Queenie was and burying my face in her neck fur. And you know what struck me? I remember her smell. Now, some of you think dogs stink. My wife thinks dogs stink. She does not like dog smell. For me, it's a very nostalgic smell. I won't say it's good, but it's not bad either. It's very nostalgic. And so I'm there, and my nose is right on my lead dog's collar, and I'm smelling her, and just like that, smells take you back. Just like that, I'm thinking of the races that we ran Sunday afternoon, the dog sled races, and I'm thinking of all the time that we spent on the trails, and I'm thinking of my older brother and me hitching up part of Dad's team and going to haul water from the spring or go up on the hill and cut birch wood that we could sell and raise and get a little bit of money. I'm thinking of all of that as I'm smelling my lead dog. Imagine Jesus' fishermen disciples going home. Galilee, Capernaum smelled a lot different than Jerusalem. Capernaum was a fishing town. And on the beach are all these old fishing boats. And the disciples, man, what a great smell. The smell of the Sea of Galilee and the smell of the fishing nets draped over poles. I imagine Peter climbing into his dad's old boat again, and the one that he'd carved initials in as a child, and picking up an oar and suddenly realizing that his hands weren't as calloused as they once were. So he's surrounded by memories in this boat. And from that spot on the beach, Peter could look to the west and see the spot where Jesus fed 5,000 people up on that hillside right there. And the lake itself is 7.5 miles wide, about 13 miles long. All the memories that lake had for these fishermen disciples. I mean, they'd been, who could forget the time that they'd been caught in the big waves out there in the middle of the night? During one storm, they went out there. Jesus wasn't worried, and Jesus was asleep in the bottom of the boat, and they thought they were going to drown, and they had to go wake him up. And there was another time when the waves got really big and were sloshing over the gunnels, and Jesus wasn't with them. And all of a sudden, Jesus comes walking to them on the waves. And so all of these experiences and memories had to be flooding the minds of Peter and the other disciples as they shoved that boat off the gravel to go fishing. Well, they fished in the dark, and they used just either the light of the moon and what stars there were. They perhaps put a torch on the front of their boats because I guess the torch attracted fish at night. And so they went out there, and all night long they're tossing that net out, and they pull it back in again. There's nothing. They toss it out again, and they pull it back in, and nothing again. And by the time the sun came up on the eastern horizon, Peter and his friends were very tired. They weren't used to this kind of work anymore. They hadn't been doing this for 3 years. And then through the very early morning mist, they saw a figure on the beach. He had a campfire going. Verse 4. Just as the day was breaking, Jesus stood on the shore, yet the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them across the water, so he's hollering this across the water, "Children, do you have any fish?" Now, your translation might say friends, or it might say fellows. It's a folksy greeting. It's very informal. "Hey, you got any fish, you guys?" "No," they answered. Why did Jesus ask that question? I mean, he knew the disciples had not caught any fish. He knew everything. He knew everything about them. So why kind of chide them with this, rub it in? I think Jesus wanted them, Peter in particular, to admit failure. Failure. That was the first step. He wanted them to say it aloud because of what he was going to do next. Before you can benefit from failure, you have to admit it. Something really significant happens when you say, "I failed. I was wrong. I let you down. I made a bad decision." Those are not easy words to say because none of us likes the losing face that comes with admitting failure. I would much rather give the impression that I always have all my stuff together. I like looking confident, That everything that I say at home and everything I do at home makes my wife feel valued and affirmed. Go ahead and believe that if you want. Everything that I do yields good returns. I'm efficient in the use of my time, and every bit of counsel that I offer is wise, and every sermon is life-changing, sure. "Hey, you guys, how's the fishing?" Now, Peter could have said, this is what a lot of people would do. Peter could have said, "Well, we think we're getting really close. We've eliminated a lot of spots already. And we've tried several things, and we're thinking, we may hit it in the next couple casts." But that's not true. If you failed and you are still trying to make yourself look good, you're not ready to learn. You're not ready for the Lord's help either. You have to admit your failure before you can benefit from it. Look at verse 6. Jesus said to them, "Cast the net on the right side of the boat, and you will find some fish." Now, they don't know who this guy is at this point, but they have nothing to lose. When you're getting skunked and you've been fishing all day, and somebody walks up and says, "Try this lure," you tie it on. You tie it on. Yeah, you bet. Probably almost with a shrug, they threw that net on across the starboard gunwale. Middle of verse 6. So they cast it. And now they were not able to haul it in because of the quantity of fish. Now, if this story sounds familiar, it's because this is not the first time a miracle like this has happened with the disciple. It happened 3 years earlier when Jesus went to call these disciples for the very first time on the same beach or very close to it. In both instances, they'd had a frustrating night of fishing. In both instances, Jesus told them to put the net down on the wrong side of the boat one more time. Both times there were more fish than they could haul in, and in both cases, Jesus' lesson was, "You can trust me. Whatever I say, you can trust me." Verse 11 says they caught 153 fish. It's a fascinating detail because fishermen always know exactly how many fish they caught. They never say, "Well, we caught about 8." It's never about 8. It's 8. It's either 8 or it's not. So if the fish were 3 to 5 pounds, let's say, or even 3.5 pounds, let's just go that high, you're talking a quarter ton of fish, all right, with 153 fish, quarter ton of fish to pull into the boat. When they saw the full net, the gospel writer John says he was the first one to realize what's going on. But Peter was the first one to act. Remember that at the tomb? John says, "I figured it out first," but Peter was the first one to act. Same thing happened here. Same sequence. Peter acts first. Verse 7. That disciple whom Jesus loved, me, John says, that disciple said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard it was the Lord, he put on his outer garment, for he was stripped for work. They worked in just loincloths, and he put his coat back on, his tunic on, and he jumps into the water. Now, in the first fish miracle, 3 years before, Peter's first reaction was, "Get away from me, Lord." That's what he said. "Get away from me, Lord, for I'm a sinful man." This time, this is a different Peter. He not only knows Jesus, but he knows he needs to talk to Jesus. They've got some things they need to discuss. He's been waiting for this opportunity. Verse 8, the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, but about 100 yards off. When they got out on land, they saw a charcoal fire in place with fish laid on it. Jesus had, without fanfare, done another miracle right there on the beach. He somehow produced some fish and had some fish cooking and bread. And Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish that you have caught." So what's going on here? Bring some of the fish you have caught. Peter and his fellow fishermen disciples, they didn't need to learn how to fish. They knew how to fish. They knew the whole fishing business, frontward and backward. When they shoved that boat off from the shore, they didn't have to ask each other, "Well, now what do we do? Who's going to do? Who's going to paddle? Where should we go? How deep should we put our net in?" Jesus was not trying to teach Peter how to fish. They knew fishing. What they didn't know yet was, without me, you can do nothing. To get to that spot, most of us have to experience failure. We hone in on our competencies. We go to school, we strengthen our competencies, whatever we're good at. We do apprenticeships, we invest time and money in learning how to do something really, really well. The problem is we can get almost too good at it. So good that we really don't think we need any help. But Jesus said, without me, you can do nothing. Nothing, not even what you think you're good at. When you're good at something, it's easy to kind of, in effect, say, "Lord, I got this one. I got this one. I've done this before." No, you don't. Without me, you can do nothing. Now, Peter's so excited, he jumps in and he swims to shore. Jesus says, "Bring some fish." So Peter has to go back to get some fish. Now look at verse 11. So Simon Peter went aboard, and he hauled the net ashore, full of large fish, 153 of them. And although there were so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." Now none of the disciples dared to ask him, "Who are you?" We'll come back to that statement. They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came and took the bread and gave it to them, and so with the fish. This was now the third time Jesus was revealed to the disciples after he was raised from the dead. Well, it sounds like everything's better now. I mean, Jesus and Peter had already exchanged words, and here they are sharing a meal. They're sharing fish and sharing bread. That's a big gesture in Middle Eastern country. So they're done, right? No, not yet. Not yet. Jesus and Peter are not together yet. They both feel it. They both feel the tension. They both feel the distance. Verse 12 says, none of the disciples wanted to confirm Jesus' identity. Why not? Because when things are tense, we call it dysfunctional in relationships, you don't want to talk things out. It's not fun. Hurts and misunderstandings stand like, elephants in our living rooms, and we all learn to walk around them. That's more comfortable than addressing the elephant. Do that long enough, and you can get really good at pretending, can't you? Nobody says anything because acknowledging the elephant is very risky. That's why graduations and weddings and funerals and family reunions are so stressful. People who have not resolved issues greet each other and act cordially, and everybody's kind of half holding their breath, wonder if anybody's going to talk about the elephant. You can feel the tension. To resolve it, somebody has to take the initiative, and in this case it was Jesus. Verse 15. When they finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, I think at that point, Peter's heart probably went into his throat. You see what Jesus called him? His old name. His old name. Remember, Jesus had changed Simon's name to Peter. He said, you're going to be the rock. I'm calling you Peter from now on. By reverting back to his original name, Jesus is asking, which man are you, Simon? Who are you? Are you just Simon, the son of John, now? Or are you still Peter? Who are you? Simon, son of John, Jesus asked, do you love me more than these other guys? After all that has happened over the past couple weeks, and Peter, you know exactly what I'm talking about. After all that's happened, Simon, are you mine? You're the one who said you would die before you would ever leave me. You would lay down your life. Remember when you said, even if all these other disciples desert you, I never will desert you. Do you remember that, Simon? Now, Peter at first tries to deflect the question. I doubt there was any eye contact. In fact, I think I know what happened. Peter's staring into the fire. He's not looking at Jesus. He's staring into the fire. Simon, do you love? Of course, it's agape love. You know the three kinds of love. Simon, do you love me? Well, of course, Lord. You know, we've been friends for a long time. We've been through a lot, Peter says. See, at this point, Peter is afraid. He's scared to death. He doesn't know what to expect. Is he about to get tossed from the group? Is he about to be shamed in front of his friends and his relatives? He knows he can't lie to Jesus. If he says, yeah, Lord, I love you too. Man, if he'd said that, his own words would have slapped him across the face. He knew he couldn't say that. So he says, yeah, you bet. We're acquainted with each other. We know each other fairly well. We're friendly. And Jesus had to repeat the question 2 more times before finally Peter came clean. Verse 16. He said to him a second time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And he said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Still the friend word. He says to him, tend my sheep. Now, and after the second time, I think Peter's thinking, maybe he's not going to fire me. Maybe this is not going to be so bad. Verse 17, he said to him a third time, Simon, son of John, do you love me? And Peter was grieved because he said to him the third time, do you love me? And Peter said to him, finally comes clean. He says, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you, but Peter still didn't feel worthy of using the same word for love that Jesus used. He just says, you're my friend. And Jesus, seeing that finally the revelation of his heart says, feed my sheep. And this is where you really have to appreciate Peter. I think he loves Jesus. I think he is telling the truth. But he honestly cannot reconcile what he did in that high priest courtyard with love. He can't. All he can say 3 times is, you're my friend. And what he's really saying is, I'm not sure I'm any better than that. I'm not sure I have it, Lord. And what the Lord does for Peter is exactly what he does for you and me when we fail. He doesn't say, well, let's just forget what happened and let's just move on. Neither does he say, Simon, okay, I tell you what, when you get strong enough and you think you can actually use the right word for love, when you can pull your bootstraps up, then I'll consider reinstating you. See, that's conditional. He doesn't do that. Instead, Jesus says, okay, Peter, I see your repentant heart. I see your humility. I can tell you're not pretending anymore. Get back in the game. We're going to have the worship team come up front, and we're going to sing. And let me pray while they're coming up. Sure. Yeah. 2. Lord, Thank you that John wrote John 21. We so needed this chapter in our Bibles. Thank you for Peter. I can so relate to Peter, and I think many of my friends here today can as well. Thank you for loving us through our failures. Thank you for using our failures to make us better disciples of yours. It's encouraging to see what Peter ends up doing just a few weeks later after he experienced your forgiveness. Lord, help us to have the same estimation of ourselves as you have of us. Not greater, not lesser, just servants of Jesus Christ. We pray these things in his name. Amen.